SUA, the scanner did not scream. It whispered, and somehow that made it worse. The immigration hall of Frontier Colony 9 was unusually quiet for a station that processed nearly 10,000 arrivals every week. Rows of silver inspection gates stretched beneath a ceiling of transparent alloy glass, revealing distant stars drifting beyond the station's artificial atmosphere. Soft blue lights illuminated the polished floor, while customs officers guided travelers toward biometric checkpoints. Most arrivals passed through without incident. A few triggered routine alerts. Nobody expected what happened when Vanessa Nix stepped into Gate 12. The young alien woman moved with calm, measured grace. Her sapphire-violet skin reflected the overhead lights like polished stone. Long silver-white hair fell across the shoulders of her simple, gray travel coat. To most observers, she appeared ordinary, quiet, educated, harmless. Exactly the kind of immigrant the colony welcomed every day. The scanner swept across her body. A soft chime sounded. Then another. The customs officer frowned. His display flashed yellow. A moment later it flashed red. Conversations nearby faded. Travelers slowed their steps. The officer stared at the screen for several seconds before reading aloud. Genetic anomaly detected. Deathworld predator lineage confirmed. Silence spread through the hall. The words seemed to absorb every other sound in the room. Vanessa closed her eyes briefly. Not surprise. Resignation. She had seen that reaction before. On other stations. Other worlds. Other checkpoints. The label followed her everywhere. Deathworld predator. Most people imagined monsters when they heard those words. Massive claws. Endless aggression. Relentless instinct. The reality was more complicated. Her species had evolved on a planet where survival demanded constant adaptation. Extreme gravity. Violent weather. Predatory ecosystems. Over thousands of generations, those pressures had shaped them into something the wider galaxy considered unsettling. Not because they were violent. Because they were capable. The officer swallowed nervously. Miss Nix, please remain where you are. Vanessa nodded. Of course. Additional security personnel approached. Their movements were professional, but she noticed the subtle tension in their posture. They expected danger. She was used to that too. A holographic review panel expanded above the checkpoint. Biological markers rotated through the air. Genetic sequences. Environmental adaptation indexes. Neural response profiles. Every measurement confirmed the same conclusion. Deathworld origin. Enhanced survival traits. Potential predator classification. Around the terminal, whispers spread from group to group. Some travelers stared openly. Others moved farther away. Vanessa kept her expression neutral. She had spent years learning how to appear smaller than she truly felt. Less intimidating. Less different. Yet no amount of effort ever seemed enough once the word predator appeared on a screen. Then something unexpected happened. A maintenance cart rolled past the checkpoint. Its electric motor emitted a tired mechanical whine. The driver barely glanced toward the growing crowd. He was a tall human wearing a faded gray work uniform and carrying a toolbox balanced against one shoulder. Light brown hair. Slight stubble. Ordinary in every possible way. The human slowed only long enough to notice the delay at Gate 12. Scanner acting up again? He asked C. SUA Frontier Colony 9 looked less impressive once someone actually lived there. Vanessa discovered that during her first week. The promotional images had promised opportunity, innovation, and unity among species. The reality smelled faintly of recycled air and industrial coolant. Cargo shuttles came and went at all hours. Maintenance drones buzzed through crowded corridors. Somewhere in the distance, machinery was always humming. The colony survived because thousands of ordinary people performed ordinary jobs every day. That fact irritated her more than she expected, especially when it came to Ethan Carter. She kept seeing him everywhere. In the water purification sector. In the transit tunnels. In the agricultural dome. Always carrying tools. Always fixing something. Always looking completely unremarkable. Vanessa sat inside a public observation lounge overlooking the colony's hydroponic gardens. Artificial sunlight poured across rows of green vegetation. Families gathered around tables. Students reviewed assignments. Workers enjoyed brief breaks before returning to their shifts. Through the glass wall below, she spotted Ethan walking along a maintenance platform. A loose conduit hung from the ceiling. He climbed a ladder, secured the connection, checked a diagnostic display, and moved on. Nothing impressive. Nothing unusual. Yet people kept greeting him. A cargo operator waved. Ethan waved back. A cafeteria worker offered him a drink. Ethan thanked her. Two children ran past carrying model spacecraft. Ethan stopped long enough to admire them before continuing toward another repair call. Vanessa frowned. The entire colony seemed strangely fond of him. A notification chimed from her wrist display. Orientation session. Community Integration Center. She sighed and stood. The session occupied nearly 2 hours. Housing regulations. Safety procedures. Emergency protocols. The usual information provided to new arrivals. Vanessa listened politely while trying not to fall asleep. Then an alarm interrupted the presentation. Not a dangerous alarm, just a maintenance alert. Several ceiling lights flickered above the room. The environmental controls paused briefly before restarting. A few attendees exchanged nervous looks. The instructor looked annoyed. Then the doors opened. Ethan entered carrying a toolkit. Vanessa nearly laughed. Of course it was him. The human crouched beside an access panel and removed several fasteners. Within minutes, the lights stabilized. Air circulation returned to normal. Problem solved. He gathered his tools and prepared to leave. Then something unexpected happened. An elderly alien near the back of the room attempted to stand. His cane slipped across the smooth floor. Before anyone. 3 days later, Frontier Colony 9 experienced its first major systems disruption of the season. The warning arrived as a low chime echoing through public corridors. Not an emergency. Not yet. Just enough to make people look up from their work. Vanessa was leaving the central transit hub when the overhead lights flickered once. Then twice. A moment later, the gravity stabilizers inside the western residential sector dropped below optimal output. She felt it immediately. Her species had evolved to notice environmental changes long before danger became visible. Around her, commuters paused. Conversations slowed. Digital signs shifted to amber status. Maintenance teams were automatically dispatched. Vanessa already knew who would appear. Sure enough, 10 minutes later, Ethan Carter arrived pushing a battered service cart through the crowd. He looked exactly the same as always. Gray uniform. Toolbox. Slightly tired expression. Nothing about him suggested importance. Yet the moment he appeared, people relaxed. The reaction fascinated her. Nobody cheered. Nobody applauded. They simply returned to their routines as though the problem had already been solved. Ethan parked beside an access hatch and began running diagnostics. Vanessa watched from a nearby observation platform. A young mother approached him carrying a restless child. Ethan listened to her concern, smiled, and pointed toward an alternate transit route. A cargo worker stopped to report another malfunction. Ethan thanked him and added it to a data pad. An elderly resident asked if the gravity fluctuations were dangerous. Ethan took time to explain the situation in simple terms before returning to work. The actual repairs seemed almost secondary. The strange part was how much effort he invested in everyone else. Vanessa descended from the platform and approached the maintenance area. Ethan was kneeling beside an open equipment panel when her shadow crossed the floor. He glanced up. Recognition appeared immediately. Hey, immigration checkpoint. She blinked. You remember me? Sure. He tightened a connector and stood. Vanessa, right? The fact that he remembered her name surprised her more than she expected. Yes. Ethan smiled. How are you settling in? The question sounded genuine. Not polite. Genuine. Vanessa hesitated. Acceptably. Ethan laughed softly. That sounds like a review somebody gives a cargo container. Before she could answer, a metallic crash echoed from farther down the corridor. Both turned. A supply cart had tipped sideways after a brief gravity fluctuation. Several storage cases scattered across the floor. Nobody was injured. Still, Ethan immediately headed toward the disturbance. Vanessa followed. By the time they arrived, several residents were already gathering the fallen containers. Ethan joined them without hesitation. He lifted boxes, reorganized supplies, checked that everyone was all right. Within minutes, the mess disappeared. The entire incident had been minor, barely worth remembering. Yet Vanessa could not stop watching him. Why? She finally asked. Ethan looked confused. Why what? Why involve yourself in every problem? He considered the question while securing the final container. Because if everybody ignores small problems, eventually they become big problems. Simple, direct, completely ordinary. Yet something about the answer lingered in her thoughts long after he returned to work. As Ethan pushed his service cart deeper into the colony, Vanessa remained standing in the corridor. For the first time since arriving on Frontier Colony 9, she found herself questioning not the colony, but everything she thought she understood about humans. The question refused to leave Vanessa alone. She found herself thinking about it during meals, during orientation courses, even during the quiet hours when Frontier Colony 9 dimmed its lights to simulate night. Why did humans spend valuable time helping strangers? The answer Ethan had given seemed too simple to be true. Small problems become big problems. That was not a survival strategy. It was a philosophy. One afternoon she decided to test it. The colony's commercial district stretched through a wide corridor lined with shops, food vendors, and public service kiosks. Warm artificial sunlight filtered through overhead panels. Families moved between storefronts. Delivery drones drifted through designated air lanes. Vanessa sat near a public fountain observing the flow of activity. Several hundred feet away, Ethan emerged from a maintenance hatch carrying a diagnostic tablet. He looked exactly as he always did. Ordinary, unremarkable, easy to overlook. Vanessa activated a translation recorder and quietly began documenting his behavior. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Nothing dramatic happened. Ethan checked environmental sensors. He repaired a damaged display panel. He exchanged greetings with residents. Vanessa was beginning to suspect she had wasted her afternoon when a sudden electrical fluctuation swept through the district. The lights dimmed. Several vending kiosks shut down. One public information terminal went dark entirely. Groans spread through the crowd. The outage was minor, annoying rather than dangerous. Most people simply continued walking. Ethan immediately changed direction. Vanessa followed from a distance. The broken terminal stood near a transit station where dozens of passengers relied on route information. Several travelers looked frustrated. A young student repeatedly tapped the blank screen. An elderly couple appeared confused about which shuttle platform they needed. Ethan approached the terminal and opened an access panel. "Give me a few minutes," he told them. Nobody had asked him for help. Nobody had ordered him to stop. Yet there he was. While he worked, he noticed the elderly couple studying a map. Ethan climbed back down from the terminal, walked over, and spent several minutes explaining their route. Then he returned to the repair. The interruption cost him time. He did it anyway. Vanessa watched carefully. Her species taught efficiency above all else. Resources, energy, time. Everything carried measurable value. Ethan seemed to calculate value differently. Eventually, the terminal flickered back to life. Relief spread through the small crowd. The student thanked him. The elderly couple thanked him. Ethan smiled and waved away their gratitude as though he had done nothing special. Then he packed his tools and started walking. Before he disappeared into the crowd, Vanessa stood and intercepted him. Ethan looked mildly surprised. "Hey, Vanessa." She folded her arms. "I have a question. That sounds serious. You repaired the terminal. You helped the travelers. You spent additional time assisting people who were not your responsibility." Ethan nodded. "Okay." Vanessa stared directly into his eyes. "Why?" For a moment, he looked genuinely confused. Then he glanced toward the busy corridor behind them. "Because someday it might be me standing there needing help." The answer landed with unexpected force. Not because it was complicated, because it was not. As Ethan continued toward his next assignment, Vanessa remained motionless beside the restored terminal. Deep inside her, beneath years of training and instinct, something unfamiliar stirred. Not fear, not suspicion, curiosity. That night, sleep came slowly. Vanessa sat alone in her small apartment overlooking the outer docking ring of Frontier Colony 9. Beyond the transparent wall, cargo vessels drifted against a backdrop of distant stars. Navigation lights blinked softly across the darkness. Inside the room, only the quiet hum of environmental systems disturbed the silence. She should have been reviewing colony regulations. Instead, she found herself replaying conversations with Ethan Carter. "Because someday it might be me standing there needing help." The statement made no sense according to the principles she had been raised with. On her homeworld, survival depended on strength, preparation, and self-reliance. Every lesson had reinforced the same truth. Depend on yourself first. Depend on others only when absolutely necessary. The strongest endured because they expected nothing from anyone. Yet humans seem to operate according to an entirely different set of rules. Varessa opened an old archive stored within her personal data core. Images appeared above the table. Harsh mountains beneath crimson skies. Endless forests dense with towering vegetation. Violent storms sweeping across ancient oceans. Her homeworld, the place that had earned her species its reputation. She watched recordings from her childhood. Training exercises. Survival instruction. Environmental adaptation tests. Every lesson emphasized awareness, caution, and control. Especially control. Because beneath the civilized surface of her people existed instincts that many other species found unsettling. Enhanced senses. Accelerated reflexes. Predator lineage. Those traits had helped their ancestors survive impossible conditions. They had also caused generations of fear throughout the galaxy. Varessa understood that fear. She spent most of her life managing the expectations that came with it. A soft notification interrupted her thoughts. Colony network update. Community volunteer request. She almost ignored it. Then she noticed a familiar name attached to the announcement. Ethan Carter. Curious despite herself, she opened the message. A small maintenance crew needed assistance reorganizing emergency supply inventories after several recent system disruptions. The task offered no extra compensation. No recognition. It was simply something that needed to be done. Varessa stared at the notice. Several minutes later, she found herself walking through the colony corridors toward the storage sector. She still was not entirely sure why. The emergency supply warehouse occupied a quiet corner of the station. Rows of containers stretched beneath bright industrial lighting. Ethan was already there, scanning inventory tags with a handheld device. A handful of volunteers sorted equipment onto transport carts. He looked up as she entered. Surprise crossed his face. Varessa? She immediately regretted coming. I was passing through. Ethan's smile suggested he did not believe that explanation for a second. Well, if you happen to be passing through near Shelf 14, I could use help organizing filtration units. Before she could invent another excuse, he handed her a scanner. The next 2 hours passed surprisingly quickly. They sorted supplies. Updated records. Moved equipment. Nothing dramatic happened. No emergencies. No revelations. Just work. Yet something strange occurred. Nobody treated Varessa differently. Nobody whispered about predator lineage. Nobody looked afraid. They simply worked alongside her. By the end of the evening, she realized Ethan had accomplished something no colony orientation program ever could. For the first time since arriving on Frontier Colony 9, she felt less like a warning label and more like a person. And somewhere deep beneath years of careful control, an old instinct quietly began paying closer attention to the human who had made that possible. Over the following weeks, an unusual routine began to form. Neither Ethan nor Varessa ever discussed it. It simply happened. Frontier Colony 9 moved through its normal cycles of work and maintenance, while the two crossed paths with increasing frequency. Sometimes it happened in the agricultural domes where rows of vegetables stretched beneath artificial sunlight. Sometimes near environmental control stations hidden behind maintenance corridors. Sometimes in public plazas where families gathered beneath simulated evening skies. Ethan always seemed to be repairing something. Varessa always seemed to be nearby. One afternoon, she found him inside the atmospheric processing sector. Warm air flowed through enormous filtration towers that disappeared into the ceiling above. The steady hum of machinery filled the chamber. Ethan was reviewing sensor data while balancing a diagnostic tablet against one arm. Varessa approached quietly. He noticed her anyway. That still bothered her. "You always hear me coming," she said. Ethan looked up from the tablet. "You walk heavier than you think." Varessa frowned. "That is impossible. Maybe for everybody else." The comment lingered between them. Her species possessed enhanced sensory awareness compared to most galactic civilizations. Few people ever noticed her approach. Ethan seemed to do it constantly. Another contradiction. Another small mystery. They spent the next hour inspecting environmental systems together. At some point, the conversation drifted away from maintenance and toward personal history. Ethan spoke about Earth. Vast forests. Mountain ranges. Thunderstorms. Small towns. Family gatherings. Simple details delivered without exaggeration. Varessa listened carefully. The more he described humanity's homeworld, the more she recognized familiar patterns. Harsh weather. Dangerous ecosystems. Constant adaptation. Different from her own planet. yet strangely similar in spirit. Eventually, Ethan asked about her homeworld. The question caught her off guard. Most people avoided the subject after learning where she came from. Ethan simply seemed interested. She hesitated before answering. The gravity is higher than most inhabited worlds. Ethan nodded. That explains a lot. Explains what? The way you move. Vanessa stared at him. Ethan smiled. You are always aware of everything around you. She considered that observation. He was not entirely wrong. Her species learned awareness early. Failure to notice a changing environment could carry serious consequences. Ethan leaned against a maintenance rail. Must have been a tough place to grow up. Vanessa looked away toward the filtration towers. Images surfaced from memory. Endless wilderness. Powerful storms. Survival training. Expectations. Control. Especially control. Her people spent years learning how to manage instincts that the wider galaxy often misunderstood. It had challenges, she admitted. Ethan nodded thoughtfully. No fear. No judgment. No uncomfortable silence. Just understanding. The response unsettled her more than suspicion ever could. Later that evening, as they walked through a transit corridor overlooking the stars, emergency monitors briefly flickered. Nothing serious. A minor power fluctuation. Ethan immediately checked the nearest status display. Vanessa watched him. There it was again. That instinct. That automatic readiness to help before anyone asked. Most species reacted when a problem directly affected them. Ethan reacted whenever a problem affected anyone. For reasons she could not fully explain, something deep inside her paid very close attention to that behavior. Ancient instincts refined across countless generations quietly observed the human beside her. Evaluating. Measuring. Not as prey. Not as competition. Something else. Something unfamiliar. And for the first time in her life, Vanessa realized those instincts seemed increasingly interested in protecting rather than surviving. The crisis began on a quiet morning. Vanessa was crossing the central marketplace when every display screen in the colony suddenly shifted from blue to amber. A low warning tone echoed through the corridors. Conversations stopped. Store owners looked up from their counters. Children paused in the middle of games. Then the overhead announcement system activated. Attention residents. Power distribution instability detected in sectors 4 through 7. Please remain calm while maintenance crews investigate. Vanessa felt a subtle vibration beneath her feet. Not dangerous. Not yet. But enough to trigger old instincts buried deep within her biology. Around her, colony residents began checking personal devices. Some headed toward designated safety zones. Others simply waited. Frontier Colony 9 had experienced minor disruptions before. Most assumed this would be another routine inconvenience. Vanessa immediately searched the crowd for Ethan. She found him exactly where she expected, already moving toward the problem. The human emerged from a service corridor carrying a diagnostic kit and a portable scanner. He was speaking into a communications headset while walking quickly toward the industrial sectors. Several technicians joined him along the way. None of them appeared panicked. Yet Vanessa noticed something else. Ethan was not heading away from the unstable systems. He was moving directly toward them. Without thinking, she followed. The industrial district felt different from the rest of the colony. The air carried the scent of heated machinery. Massive power conduits ran along reinforced walls. Indicator lights blinked above sealed maintenance doors. By the time Vanessa arrived, engineers were already gathering around a holographic display. Energy flow diagrams rotated through the air. Several sections glowed amber. One section glowed red. Ethan studied the display with a frown. The distribution regulators are drifting out of synchronization, one technician reported. If the cascade spreads, multiple sectors could lose environmental support. Vanessa saw several worried expressions. Environmental support was not a luxury. It regulated air quality, temperature, and life support infrastructure throughout the colony. Ethan nodded once. Then we stop the cascade before it spreads. Simple. Direct. As though he were discussing a clogged filter instead of a colony-wide emergency. Another vibration rolled through the floor. Slightly stronger this time. Nearby lights dimmed for a fraction of a second. Several engineers exchanged nervous glances. Ethan immediately began assigning tasks. He directed teams toward critical junctions. Requested updated diagnostics. Checked backup systems. Nobody questioned him. They simply moved. Vanessa watched the process unfold with growing confusion. Ethan held no major leadership position. He was not a commander, not a governor. Yet people trusted him instinctively, because he was already doing something while others were still deciding what to do. Hours passed. The instability continued growing. More warning symbols appeared across the holographic display. Technicians rushed between control stations. Through it all, Ethan remained focused, calm, determined. Then a new alert flashed across every screen in the room. A primary power relay near the outer habitat ring had failed. Silence filled the operations center. Everyone understood the implication immediately. If that relay could not be stabilized, the entire cascade would accelerate. Ethan grabbed his toolkit before anyone else spoke. Vanessa felt something tighten deep inside her chest as he headed toward the exit. Because for the first time since arriving on Frontier Colony 9, she had the unmistakable feeling that the human might actually need help. The outer habitat ring felt colder than the rest of the colony. Emergency lighting cast long amber reflections across metal walls while maintenance alarms echoed through nearly empty corridors. Ethan moved quickly, portable scanner in one hand and toolkit in the other. The failed relay station sat near the edge of the ring, where environmental systems connected to the colony's primary power grid. If the cascade reached that junction, thousands of residents could lose critical services. Behind him, footsteps approached. Ethan turned and found Vanessa following. "You should be back at operations," he said. "Probably," she replied. "Yet here I am." Ethan almost smiled despite the situation. Together, they continued deeper into the maintenance sector. The relay chamber was larger than Vanessa expected. Towering power conduits stretched overhead like metallic roots. Blue electrical indicators flickered unevenly across massive regulator assemblies. The air carried the sharp scent of overheated components. Engineers were already present, studying diagnostic displays projected into the air. Their expressions were not encouraging. Ethan stepped directly into the middle of the discussion. "Status." One technician pointed toward a rotating schematic. "The primary relay is rejecting synchronization commands. Every correction creates another fluctuation." Ethan studied the data in silence. Vanessa watched his eyes move across streams of information. To most observers, it looked overwhelming. To Ethan, it seemed familiar, like a mechanic listening to an engine. Eventually, he nodded. "The relay is not the source." Several engineers looked confused. Ethan enlarged a section of the schematic. "The feedback loop originates farther upstream. The relay is reacting to bad data." Hope appeared across several faces. If he was right, the situation could still be contained. Without waiting for recognition, Ethan immediately started organizing repair teams. One group headed toward the distribution hubs. Another moved toward backup regulators. He assigned tasks with calm efficiency. The atmosphere inside the chamber slowly changed. Panic became focus. Uncertainty became action. Vanessa stood nearby observing everything. Then something happened that caught her attention. A junior technician dropped a diagnostic module while rushing between stations. The device struck the floor and scattered components across the walkway. The young technician froze in embarrassment. The chamber was already overloaded with problems. Nobody had time for mistakes. Yet Ethan immediately knelt beside him. "Relax," he said. "We will fix it." Together they gathered the scattered parts. The delay cost precious minutes. Ethan never complained. Vanessa felt an unfamiliar tension deep inside her chest. Her instincts had spent years evaluating threats, opportunities, weaknesses, and strengths. They understood survival. They understood competition. They did not understand this. Ethan kept investing energy into people who offered nothing in return. Yet somehow those people always became stronger because of it. Another alarm sounded. New data flooded the displays. The cascade was accelerating. The upstream failure had finally been located. Unfortunately, it was buried inside a restricted maintenance junction accessible only through a narrow service corridor. Ethan grabbed his toolkit immediately. "I am going in." Before anyone could respond, Vanessa stepped forward. The movement surprised even her. Every eye in the chamber shifted toward the blue-skinned newcomer with the predator lineage. For a brief moment, silence filled the room. Then Vanessa looked directly at Ethan and said something she never expected to say. "You are not going alone." Deep beneath years of discipline and control, something ancient had fully awakened. Not hunger, not aggression, not dominance. A powerful instinct that recognized someone worth protecting. The service corridor was barely wide enough for two people to walk side by side. Pipes lined the walls. Emergency lights painted everything in alternating shades of amber and red. Somewhere beyond the reinforced bulkheads, the colony's power systems continued struggling against the growing cascade. Ethan carried a diagnostic scanner in one hand and a toolkit in the other. Vanessa followed close behind. The farther they moved into the maintenance network, the quieter the station became. Eventually, they reached the upstream junction. The source of the problem, a damaged synchronization regulator, sat hidden behind layers of access panels. Streams of corrupted data flashed across Ethan's scanner. He exhaled slowly. Found it. Vanessa studied the equipment. To her eyes, it looked insignificant. A cluster of processors and relay conduits no larger than a storage cabinet. Yet every alarm throughout the colony traced back to this one failure. Ethan immediately began working. Access panels opened. Diagnostic cables connected. Commands flowed across the display. Minutes passed. Then more. The tension inside the corridor never fully disappeared. Above them, the colony continued waiting. Ethan remained focused. Methodical. Calm. Vanessa watched him carefully. The old instincts inside her were completely awake now. Not the instincts other species feared. Not the predator stories whispered across the galaxy. Something deeper. An ancient awareness designed to recognize value. To protect what mattered. For most of her life, she had directed that instinct toward survival. Toward herself. Now it was focused on the human kneeling beside a maintenance panel. Eventually the scanner chimed. Ethan smiled for the first time in hours. There you are. He isolated the corrupted feedback loop and replaced the damaged regulator core. Across the colony, systems began stabilizing almost immediately. Warning lights shifted from red to amber, then from amber to blue. Power distribution synchronized. Environmental controls recovered. The cascade ended. Just like that. Vanessa felt the vibration beneath her feet disappear. The colony was safe. They returned to operations where exhausted engineers watched status displays with relief. Applause broke out when the final system report appeared. Ethan looked embarrassed by the attention. Several technicians thanked him. Others congratulated him. He accepted every compliment with the same response. Everybody helped. The answer made several people laugh. Because everyone knew it was true. Hours later, Frontier Colony 9 settled into a peaceful evening. Families returned to restaurants. Children resumed games. Storefronts reopened. Life continued. Ethan stood alone on an observation deck overlooking the stars. He always seemed to find work after everyone else stopped. Vanessa joined him quietly. This time he did not seem surprised. For several moments neither spoke. Distant ships drifted through the darkness beyond the glass. Finally Ethan glanced toward her. You know, you never told me why you followed me today. Vanessa looked out at the stars. The answer came more easily than she expected. At first, I thought you were ordinary. Ethan laughed softly. That sounds about right. She shook her head. No, I was wrong. The bioluminescent markings along her cheeks glowed faintly beneath the observation deck lights. My people spend their lives learning to control what the galaxy calls predator instincts. Ethan listened quietly. Today I finally understood something. What is that? Vanessa turned toward him. For the first time since arriving on Frontier Colony 9, there was no hesitation in her expression. The strongest instinct is not the desire to survive. Ethan waited. Vanessa smiled. A real smile. Small. Honest. Meaningful. It is the desire to protect someone worth protecting. Silence followed. Comfortable silence. Beyond the glass, countless stars stretched across the darkness. Ethan looked out at them and smiled too. And somewhere between one world and another, a human and an alien discovered that the most powerful force in the galaxy was neither fear nor strength. It was choosing to care.